Good evening, TNT family. We are fortunate tonight to have two very distinguished guests, our MP and Chairman Dave Tancoo and Dr. Stephen Ramroop, who is the former CEO of the ODPM. So, with this current situation taking place in Trinidad, we couldn't be more fortunate to have Dr. Ramroop here tonight with us to give us a little insight of what he sees taking place, what we could have done to prevent the situation as what taking place or to minimize what we see that's taking place. So, gentlemen, I want to welcome both of you for taking the time to join us here and to kind of educate us on what's taking place. Uh, Dave, I want to start with you so you can tell us what's going on within your constituency or surroundings.
All right. So thank you very much. Good night to all your viewers and to your listeners. Right now, we have several hundred homes that are impacted by heavy floodwaters, some more than others, but we also have hundreds of thousands of individuals, and that's not an understatement, who have been adversely affected because they are commuters by heavy traffic, by floodwaters, and there are some homeowners who are unable to go to work, etc. That has been happening in both my constituency and on the constituency belonging to Mr. Prasad Bisesa, that's the Siparia constituency, and to a lesser extent in the Upuch East constituency. So South Trinidad has been inundated with bad weather for the last 2 days, severe bad weather, which has resulted in flooding, as I said, in a couple, quite a few homes, and quite a few 100,000 persons are directly affected. Um, I cast aspersions on, in fact, I want to give full blame for this on the part of the government because the solutions, as Dr. Ramu would tell you, are easily well known. There are some constraints, homes have been built in low-lying areas, etc., but there are solutions to all of those things. Those solutions are no secret. They have been raised. I have raised some of those issues as well in the parliament and before. And today, it was very frustrating on my part to drive by, to pass by, to check my residence and realize how badly they are affected by something that is predictable and something that could have been treated with if the government was inclined in stopping this, what I call geographic discrimination. As we speak, there are some homes which still have 3 and 4 feet of water. There's still some bad weather. I just came from there. There's still some bad weather threatening us, which means that with the ground already waterlogged and the water course is already high, further bad weather will only lead to increased flooding.
So, I believe, strongly believe, with the proper mitigation and the cleanup and restructuring of our infrastructure that we can kind of minimize some of these or major part of this flooding. So, Dr. Ramroop, you want to jump in here and insight on this?
Well, well, as you know, good evening, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to, to add into the problems, to say a few things about the problems that we're having in our country. And if you remember, recently we had very bad floods in Spain, and even now in certain parts of Central and West Africa, we have floods that are really causing a lot of problems. So it's a global phenomena. We do have COP29, going on now in Baku. And then we have Trump winning the elections, by you guys there. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the global advocacy for climate change is going to evolve as we go forward. But in a small country like ours, as the MP Dave has just said, it does affect communities. It has a greater impact on communities because we are smaller. Um, and For example, my daughter-in-law works in MIC in Pinal, and she had to leave her car there because she couldn't come out of the compound. So that when you look at those things, it actually comes home right in front of our doors. Even if we're not affected, directly we are affected indirectly. So the problem with with what is happening in a small country like ours, is that you have not, we don't seem to be addressing the problem in terms of aggressively and also sustainably. There are a few things that will help, but it cannot be taken by itself. In other words, it's a whole of government, almost like a whole of country approach. It's just not Ministry of Works responsibility or Ministry of Local Government. It's flooding, like crime, really. It's a problem that affects the whole country, and everyone has to play a part. In the Latin American countries, when I was in ODPM, they called it a socio-natural problem, in that although climate change does have an impact on flooding, or it does cause some of the flooding, there are social and economic issues. I think the MP kind of alluded to some of those in terms of allocation of funds and etc. Flooding is going to be with us forever. It's never going to change. It's never going to actually be solved, because if you remove flooding, or you mitigate some flooding in areas like we are seeing now, you improve the resiliency of the people, it's going to happen in other areas. Water just tends to move around. I mean, if you block water, it's going to move. Everyone knows that. And most of the scientists who are dealing with flooding knows that. The problem is that allocation of funding, mitigation measures are all what we call not politically good. In other words, then it's a problem we're having in the world, where a lot of persons who represent countries who sit in Geneva or New York, and they talk at the UN level, or even in some of the regional bodies, we find that a lot of persons in governments don't tend to put enough funds into mitigation, because the returns on mitigation of, for example, flooding, tends to take longer to realize within that election period. So you'll find that there are two types, as you know, of mitigation in these cases: structural and non-structural. You could stop me anytime, because the thing about it is that there are things that can be done. It will help certain parts of the same community by an inch, maybe. Certain other parts may not. So that you have to take it's a multifaceted approach, right? And when we look at the science of dealing with flooding, we talk about a word called mitigate, meaning that what mitigate really means is you can't really get rid of it, but you could decrease the impact of it. And if you look at some communities, they are more resilient in that the flood comes, they get up and they do what they have to do, clean out, and they go back again. There are sometimes when the flood is so bad, like what happened today and yesterday, in which it's so bad that a lot of persons are impacted, not just, as the MP said, not just the people in the flood, but the people trying to get to their homes and even to leave the areas. So, I mean, there are many things. I mean, it's not going to be like a science discussion, but what it is that I had the opportunity when I was at ODPM to look at some of the systems that were put in place in places like, for example, Japan, where there's a big problem with flooding. It's a small island almost. And we found that they had some innovative solutions, because they are very interested in saving their heritage sites. They lost a lot of temples and a lot of lives in the past. And again, they had flooding recently. But when you look at the number of persons who died compared to a country like Spain, where 200 more people died, I remember looking at some of the systems that they took us. And one of the things that they created was, like, for example, when you go to Rochard Road, or when you go to Rock Road, and even Woodland and some of the areas, we visited similar communities, and I sent reports to the government, Ministry of Planning, as well as that time Ministry of National Security. And what they did is they created these artificial, almost, channels, almost like rivers. And they created artificial ones, and they connected it to the natural water courses with pumps and what they call sluice gates. So that what they did is they maneuvered the water flow from the natural and courses, like the runoff problems, into some of these. Now, I'm just giving an example of a structural mitigation measure. There are many, like maintaining existing infrastructure, People talk about looking at your watersheds and making sure that the watersheds are properly managed. That's the Water Resource Agency. They talk about cleaning the existing drains, cleaning the existing rivers, using levees, raising the bridges that you have in the area. All of these things will have to be done. They're going to have to put a lot more money into mitigation, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen year after year. They're going to have to start raising the bridges. They're going to have to create these artificial water courses along the side. In fact, I even saw in some cases where they put the water courses under the roads, and they floated the roads, and they raised the roads, because one of the biggest problems is egress in and out of a flooded area, getting resources in and out of a flooded area, getting people to come back into their homes in the evening, or even to get resources to them when they're in the flooded area. So raising a lot of those roads that you currently have in those flooded areas. ODPM, well, when I was in ODPM, I think we were a little more aggressive in terms of trying to do some of the research. There's a lot of models and measurements that have to be done right now to look at exactly. I remember in Europe, in Britain, when they were having a lot of flooding in some of the areas, they use these radiological beads, right? And they let the beads go, like, and during the drier parts, and when the rain fell, the beads actually floated to the areas where most of the water was going. And then they took sensors and they took pictures of where the water was actually flowing. Now, all of these things are things that need to be done, because we need to see how the water is getting into the roads. If you have bridges that are being built and they're at the same level of the roads are going to be the rivers. So, what I'm trying to say is that there are mitigation measures, large ponds, large areas that we can develop. And I mean, I drive through Rosha Road sometimes when I go into Mayaro in the back there, and I pass in the lovely countrysides. And there are a lot of areas that can actually be used as water retention ponds. And these can be used for fishing, recreation, sporting events. I mean, when I went to Japan, they built levees on some of these artificial water courses, and they raised the banks. And you know what they did? They had walking tracks and cycle tracks for the residents of the area, going right out into the Gulf of Paria, for example. In other words, when you're building water courses, you're raising the banks, you're putting nice fences, you're lighting it up, you're putting benches where the older persons are. We are living longer. We are living to 80, 85 in Trinidad now. People need to walk, and they're actually cycling on the track, on the levee, right up, and the levee is preventing the water from coming in. As I said, these are natural water courses, and what they did is they created these pumps, so that what it did is when the water in the waterfall, like water, because of development, you're going to have more water that is going to be coming from your runoff. People are using more than 33% of their land. So you have to have, in terms of the non-structural mitigation things, you have to have land use planning, you have to have zoning, you have to have early warning systems. One of the biggest failures in Spain was the early warning system. In other words, then, this is a big country. They had a lot of resources. Where they failed is that they did not evacuate persons in time. They couldn't go to the communities and tell the people to get out of their basements. A lot of people went into the basements and they died. So it was the development of early warning systems. There are people who live next to woodland or something, next to the water courses, and they can tell you when it's going to flood. They don't need ODPM or anybody to tell you. They will tell you when that water reaches a certain level, when it's going to flood. So you see, there are a lot of things that has to be done. And this is not the responsibility of the Ministry of Work or Fire or the MP. This is a responsibility of everyone. And what I'm trying to say, to cut a long story short, because I could go on and on and on and on, it takes a government, but it also takes a whole of country approach to deal with this. And we have to be a little more aggressive, because climate change is going to get worse. You see, and communities are going to be more affected because funding is going to drop, right? And not only that, you have economic situations, you have more development taking place. People are going to invest more money in their property to make money. They're going to be putting more galvanized sheds and covering more than 33% of the property, which is required by, we don't even have a building code, you see? So we don't even have an approved building code. And that's another problem. So even buildings are not being regulated in terms of people putting more than 33% of their property with sheds and covering the entire property. All that water has to run off. And finally, What I also saw, if you look at that areas in Rock Road and Rocha Road, there's a lot of development, a lot of buildings, a lot of construction that has gone on. And I saw myself where they were using these pavements and they were using these um these car parks and parks for businesses where they put a material under the actual surface. That material collected the water through porous concrete and through porous drains that collected the water. So there was water retention, and they were actually using those water. I saw it in Japan. They were actually using that water to come back and flush their toilets, right? Wash their vehicles and whatever. And it reduced the amount of water that was going into the drains. So water retention higher up means that less water will come lower down. So all of these things, it sounds like it's theory, but they have been put in place. And I think this is what any government or any authority, local government or national, has to now sit down with the communities, look at all the solutions that are there. We don't even have to reinvent the wheel. Try to see how much we can, quick wins, medium term and long term. But it's a lot of it has to be information, education, teaching people about what to do in flooding. I for one don't like to see people go with boats and resources into homes where people are flooding and give them stuff. I prefer to see, I mean, this is just me and this is the science anyway, to move them out into a drier area, protect their homes and whatever. When everything has dried out, you come back, clean it out and bring them back. Give them the new mattresses and stuff, but get them out from the flooded area, because every time a flood occurs like this, you're going to have two things happening. One, health issues, and two, health issues that could be coming from nutrition. A lot of our vegetables like bhaji and lettuce and everything that's going to be coming out of those areas after is going to be a problem. So we're going to have to look at those things.
Dave, you want to jump in here, or I just wanted to add a few things. You see, I strongly believe in putting resources into the mitigation, where we do the infrastructural work to prevent as much as we can. I strongly believe we can retain a lot of this water if we expand the river courses, we create extra water treatment and retain where it is necessary. We could do that. I strongly believe we could do that. We spend a lot of money in Trinidad and Tobago in the budget. We don't see where the money going. So I strongly believe on that part of the mitigation. While a few years back we had Colonel Carrizales, who was part of the U.S. Embassy there, and she was very, interested in assisting us in putting resources across the country for us to be able to respond, to get our people trained. I had resource people here to train us in emergency management and response. And that's before I got to know about you, Dr. Ramroop. And to do the local training and preparation for our country, that training our citizens how to respond, putting the necessary resources in place in response. So Dave, feel free to jump in here when you can.
Sure. Allow me if I may. I think Dr. Ramroop has just hit the nail on the head. The answers to flooding exist. With global warming getting more significant as a problem, we will expect continuous challenges with regards to rainfall. We cannot have people continuing in the 21st century now. We cannot have people experiencing this kind of life-changing floods on a continuous basis, living in absolute fear every time the rain sets up, especially when there are reasonable solutions. Now, I remember Minister of Works and Transport under whom drainage falls. On May 24th, 2020, there was a newspaper article, a Newsday article, in which the minister says that he expects that flooding will be a thing of the past in 5 years' time. We are fourth year, we are now going into our fifth year. In fact, we are now in our fifth year of this government without a single thing being done, except for the traditional. Some drains have been cleaned, some rivers have been cleaned. In such a trace, for example, we still have a river that does not have an elevated bank. We still have a river that does not have an elevated bank. So what do you think will happen when water comes down? Now, I'm in agreement with Dr. Ramroop as well. This needs to be a national issue, because the rivers, the water that is coming down today in Urpuch West was yesterday in the Clark Rochard area. So the water, we know, and he's right. People who are living in these flood areas, these areas, people who are living next to the Newcott Channel, people who are living next to the river in Suchatris can tell you when the floods are going to come. So from the time we saw the floods higher up, we knew that today we will be faced with the water coming down en masse, and the systems having not been put in place, we were going to be expecting flood. This should not be happening, especially since we know that global warming is making things worse. So that we are ending up with worse and worse and worse flooding experiences. I praise God. I thank God. Dr. Ramroop is a praying person just like my good self. I thank God that so far we have not had substantial damage in terms of loss of life, because that's always going to be a risk, because flooding causes several things, including mudslides, etc., and high enough floods, as has happened in Spain. Dr. Ramon just mentioned it, where we have people who remained in their properties and died. I thank God that has not happened so far, but you will recall over the last 3 or 4 years, we've had floods that are 6 and 7 feet high in people's homes, where they had to be evacuated using boats, using pirogues. Yesterday, the flood was so high that a dump truck, water was reaching the bonnet of a dump truck. Think of how high that had to have been. And that's on the roads. And on many of these areas, the roads are slightly higher or substantially higher than the level of the homes. Think about this. This is 2 days of rain. What happens in December when we have 3 and 4 and 5 days of rain? We can expect serious disasters. And the challenge is, Dr. Ramroop hit the nail on the head. I started by saying that when he said, in other parts of the world, solutions exist, tried and tested solutions. All may not be applicable to Trinidad and Tobago, but some are. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. The problems are known, the solutions are known. We have had drainage studies for decades. But what is required is a commitment from the government. And I think, Dr. Ramrup, again, commendations to you. You hit the nail on the head. It's not a pretty thing. You don't get to see the results of it because you're solving a problem. So you're not going to see um, when you dig a retention pond in the bush, you're not going to see it. But the best example that you raised just now is the use of levees. In such a trace, for example, if you elevate the riverbanks, half of your problem, the risk of flooding, is reduced. And if you continue to raise riverbanks throughout, if you continue to do things like retention ponds, like divert using pumps, divert water into other areas as required, you could generate not just a solution to the flooding problem, but this can be used to generate substantial commercial and tourist opportunity. You can have both domestic and foreign tourists coming to this country to benefit from fishing on the lakes, etc. That could be used to generate uh, fishing, aquaculture, as a form of increasing revenues, as a form of developing communities. You can get community involvement in some of this activity. You can trap the water and use it to plant rice. Some of these things have happened before. My concern is that over the last decade, we have raised these issues. In the last 4.5 years, I could tell you I raised these issues in Parliament. And always we get commitments, but the government is not inclined. I raise one last example before I hand over again. Greenvale flooded 3 or 4 years ago. Massive flood. Massive flood. The river broke its bank and Greenvale flooded. The flooding was horrendous. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 feet of floodwaters in people's homes. Do you know that in Tulsa Trace we've had a similar experience? But the community that the government brought to bear, the resources that the government brought to bear when they tackled the issue in Greenvale, and I commend the government for actually working on Greenvale's solution, and I'm glad for the people of Greenvale. However, why is it that the same sort of emphasis could not be placed on finding a workable solution for the benefit of the people of South Trinidad, especially Approach East, Approach West, and Siparia, which this day, yesterday and today, have been severely affected by the flooding? Where is it that, when Dr. Ramroop was in office, ODPM was down on the ground, aggressively working from the time we had issues like this, and even before. So you hit the nail on the head again. When ODPM was involved in preparing research of solutions for specific areas, that research exists. The government, however, in the last 5 years does not seem to be inclined to touch it especially when it comes to South Trinidad and Tobago. It seems to be that geographic discrimination happens across the board, but it is even worse than that, my friends. We have a situation when some of these communities, Dr. Rabu, I'm sure you would have been affected as well. We have a water problem, potable water. People are not getting water for 6 and 7 weeks. Think about living without water for 6 and 7 weeks, having to buy water, especially that some of these people are living in communities that are not well off. And they have to sacrifice from their little incomes, where they're already paying property tax. They have to sacrifice from their little incomes in order to buy water. When we have these kind of flooding episodes, how are these people going to make sure that there's cleanup? Because now think about it, and what you have is people in these communities have latrines, but you also have septic tanks and soakaways that are flooded. And therefore, the water that is outside of these homes is septic. It can cause tremendous disease. It can cause risks of all sorts. Plus, you have garbage, you have um, different types of broken trees, you have glass, you have wood, you have galvanized, you have those kinds of things. Plus, you have vermin. I saw today somebody was showing me in their backyard in Tulsa Trace an alligator or a crocodile. I'm not sure what the local version is, but there was an animal that is a risk to pets in their backyard. So you have a series of risks. So it is not just that flooding happens because the Ministry of Works didn't do the job, or that the Ministry of Local Government did not sufficiently fund the regional corporations to do it. Over the last couple of days, Gautam Maharaj has been exemplary as the chairman of Pinal Debe Regional Corporation, going personally to ensure that his councillors are on the ground. The same thing has happened with the mayor of Siparia, Dunat Meru, making sure that their councillors are on the ground trying to assist people because the crisis is already here. But they have also been trying to get the right things put in place, the right measures put in place, the dredging of the rivers, the cleaning of the water courses, the creation of water retention ponds, the creation of artificial levees where you build the banks of the river higher than the river levels. Some of those things are easily done if the government was concerned enough to start. It is not an overnight process. I mean, when I heard the minister promise 4 years ago that this will happen in 5 years, I was elated because it meant that there was a plan. Little did I know that there may have been a plan. He just was not going to implement any of it.
Good night, gentlemen. I'd like to commend you all on the presentation thus far. Um, I'd like to share some history. When we had Carney 1975, are you all hearing me?
Yes, 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 we are.
Yeah, when we had Carney 1975 Limited functional, we
And
never
Petrochip.
had, we never
And
had,
Petrochip.
and Petrotin, correct. And we never had all this immense flooding because they maintained their acreage and they took care of the drainage in these acreages. And that helped immensely to prevent flooding. Now, we have had the closure of Carney, first of all, and that resulted in the all the fields being left unattended, all the drainage being left unattended, and that is what resulted in the large amount of flooding on the highway back in the early 90s and so on. Now the government didn't look into that, and with all the planning, I remember Dr. Ramroop, when you came in as the ODPM, you started some work on that, being proactive in your exercises in looking at mitigation. This government that we have here now isn't proactive. They are reactive, and they're not even reactive to, as you just pointed out, MP Tancoo. They are not reactive either because they are reactive in selective areas. And even in those areas, they are suffering too because Port of Spain is still flooding. Rysel Road is still flooding. South Key is still flooding. They haven't done what is needed to mitigate. They don't understand what mitigation means. and the ODPM doesn't understand what their function is supposed to be. I'm sure you will agree with me, Dr. Ramroop, based on what your vision at the time when you were in office was. Now, a simple example in the Penal Debe region, Clark Road floods. Not one drop of that water goes into the Clark Road Dam. Not one drop of that water. And Clark Road Dam is next to Clark Road. And WASA has a facility there for water, and WASA doesn't have enough water in that dam to pump to supply the people with water. The same thing happens in Sign Village. Sign Village floods, and not one drop of that water goes into the Mora Dam where they have a facility. The same thing happens in Arena, Kearney Arena. All Tabakit, Kuva, Tabakit, Talparo floods, and not one drop of that water goes into the Arena Dam or the other dam. Not one drop. It goes, it remains on surface and floods the communities. And that is what you are suggesting, what both of you all are suggesting is correct. We have to be proactive and use our money, all this money they are getting from all over the place to do work on development for water management and water resources. We have to use that to create retention ponds, as you all rightly suggested, so that we can have the water we need. Next week, we're going to hear our friend Marvelous Marvin come on and tell us we have to, we're going to suffer for the next dry season because we don't have enough water in the dam. In none of the dams, not in Mora Dam, not in Arena, nowhere. So it's exactly what we have to look at, and we have to start thinking proactively, like you were saying, Dr. Ramroop, and when you were in that capacity, to start being proactive about mitigation, and raise these suggestions with the government so that they can get off their hindquarters and get stuff going until they are removed from government and we can get these things in place. What are your views on this?
But I mean, I agree that we have lost quite a lot of the plans and policies that we had put in when I was there in ODPM. They it's a political organization, the ODPM. It's actually when I was appointed at ODPM at the time, there were actually interviews for my job. When I left, I think they just appointed who they thought would be able to lead it, and I think that there's a lot of science in mitigation. It's not, in other words, then I mean, with all due respects to the military, it's probably not a national security issue primarily. So just having the National Disaster Authority, and it's not even authority, it's a cabinet minute that was done for that entity. So it has no political or legislative clout. And in this government, it's even worse because they sort of put a lot of emphasis on disaster risk reduction on the local government ministry. And in fact, one of the late ministers of work did indicate that TIMA had more, was better off than ODPM. I remember in the early part of the government, which is true because TIMA has more political strength and legislative authority under the Tobago House of Assembly Act than ODPM, which is just a division of national security and has no legislative authority. So they can't engage. And basically what we did at the time, we had we had national support, we had government support, and we had the ability to engage and to befriend a lot of the players involved, with love and trying to to give them some resources and to build resiliency at the unit level, which is at the house level, at the homeowners level. In other words, and that is the trick. It's called resiliency, and we tried to build resiliency, and it worked because I can tell you that although we have had, I remember one Diwali, if you remember, we had very, very bad flooding. It happens around October, November, December when the soil is saturated, when flooding is at its worst, especially if you have very heavy rainfall in one area, which is tending to be a climate change effect, where it's almost like if a bucket of water is being poured onto the area, and that is the difference that we are seeing in the type of rainfall that we saw many years ago. So that the actual type of rainfall, when we look at radar images, it's almost as if there's a heavy downpour in one area, and the water doesn't have enough time to get into the soil, so the runoff from the areas, from the galvanized roofs and all the other roofs onto the concrete and onto the roads, because it is the easy way to go. So even that has changed. And what we are seeing is that you are actually rehabilitating things like roads and bridges, but all you're really doing is paving them, and you're
Yes.
just paving the bridge. Is the bridges have to be elevated. When you look at the disasters that are taking place globally, you see a lot of those bridges are above the water that is running, gushing below. If the bridges that are being fixed are at the same level of the road and is not elevated, is going to be a problem. I mean, even the one in Woodland, it is higher, but it's too narrow. Those bridges have to be wider. You have to start widening. The country doesn't stay in one place. We are developing. We have more traffic. We have more people with cars, driving on those roads. So you can't rehabilitate a bridge and leave it two lanes. They have to be wider and higher. So
Plan for the future.
even the science, you have to look at next 10 to 15 years. You planned
Correct.
15, 20 years ago in terms of planning. And this is some of the problems. I mean, when I was in ODPM, I even spoke to the people in Maracas. We said that in most countries, and if you go to many of those countries where you have beaches, you will notice that, for example, if you look at Miami Beach, all the beaches, if you look at Nice in France, the Riviera, the beach is the beach, then you have a boardwalk, then you have a road, and on the other side, you have houses, you have businesses, you have car parks. But in Trinidad, you put bacon shark sheds on the beach. So you
Yes.
see, every time it floods, you will have it. And this is basic science. But you see, political correctness is the problem, is a large problem. And resource allocation, I don't want to get too much into that, but what I'm trying to say is a lot of the problems in smaller countries, not just Trinidad, a lot of countries around the world where you have developing countries where people are accessing or trying to access funding, from United Nations, from JICA, the Japanese organizations, from the non-governmental organizations, from the European Union, from Small Island States Developing Fund, right? You have to make very good cases. The European Union, I remember when we were going to them, at the diplomatic level, their conditions are very strict, right, in terms of when they will give you money and how they give you that money. They're not going to tolerate persons who just say, well, like, I want 25 million to deal with flooding. It has to be carefully planning. It has to be planned for 15 to 20 years. You have to have proper metrics to measure what you're going to be doing, to see if you're actually doing what we're talking about. They have to have a resiliency component of those projects. So even getting funding on a large scale from the big donor organizations that are going to be putting money after COP29 into flooding and the effects of climate change, you're going to have to sit down and do proper community-based engagements with your communities. You have to do property surveys. You have to go into all those houses that are flooded and look at the individual situation. What happened with their drainage? What happened with their roofing? Are they on the bottom floor? Do they have a neighbor next door that they can go to live on the upper floor while their house is flooded out, so you don't have to move them to a shelter? So you see, all of these things have to be done at the community level. So there are a lot of community work that it has nothing to do with, again, the Ministry of Works or the local government or the fire services. It has to do with the community. So a lot of the resiliency projects would also have to start with the community. And we have to understand that what is happening higher up is going to impact what is happening lower down. And therefore, a lot of work has to be done in terms of water retention, the use of porous concrete in terms of building plain fields and pavements and things, and paved car parks higher up where the water is coming from, so that more water is kept up there. Those things have to be also done with the corporate and the business sector. In other words, then the business sector have to come together and say, look, if I'm going to be paving a car park right? A bank is going to be paving a car park, or they're going to have the business places or commercial entities are going to be. You talked about Petrotrin, you talked about the oil company and Caroni. See, a lot of that is going to have to come back now to Ministry of the Town and Country Planning. They're going to have to come back and look at some of the buildings that have to be commercially approved. So that even car parks and pavements and tennis courts and whatever is higher up, they have to use special surfaces so that the water is retained and it doesn't just run off and hit the people in such a trace on the way to the river, on the way to the Gulf. So it's not it's as I said, it's not a complex problem. It's just a whole of community, a whole of government problem, and it's a whole of country problem. My suggestion going forward really is that, I mean, it's really frustrating when you serve that like ODPM and you knew the solutions, you knew what needed to be done. It's just that you were not able to get through to the different ministries, right? Because it's as though like crime. Then it's as you think that everything is national security, but it's not. It's actually, municipal police, it's private security, it's community policing, it's people looking and when you go to yourself, when you go to a function, you don't park your car in a dark area. It's like people who come out of their homes and they're not looking in the garage before they come out. So it's not just national security. So similar flooding is not just government, it also has to be community organizations, people who actually go now after the flood and give a lot of the hampers and the pampers. What we need to do with them is we need to come down and bring them together and say, look, you spend a lot of money in giving me help and humanitarian support, and we still need that. Oh my God, we need that. We're not saying that we don't. But you know what? Could you now sit down and look at some of our plans in terms of mitigation? Simple mitigation. I'm talking about even property surveys, going back to look at your entire communities in all the areas that were affected by flooding more than 2 or 3 times over the last 3 years. That's a very good metric. Go back and look at these properties and see if we can begin to mitigate some of the circumstances that are in the properties while we deal with some of the bigger things where, via our MP and via the parliamentarians and, legislation and policy. There's other things that needs to be done. But there are also things that needs to be done at the house level, at the home level. And that was one of the strengths that we had at ODPM at the time, as I said, and we did get funding support from the government at that time. And I think we also knew the science, and I think if I may say so myself, we had good leadership. We had a team. We had more science involved in what we were doing rather than just trying to be politically correct. And I think that we did create some change in terms of what was happening, and some of that is still impacting communities now because we have had very little deaths over the last few years, which is something that I must commend the the community workers, the politicians themselves, who actually have gone out and helped a lot of those people using the resources in the area and the lobbying, because they did a lot of cleaning. When I looked at I passed there not too long ago in the crop time, and there was a lot of community cleaning as well as work done, but it's not enough. I mean, the problem is that there needs to be a proper plan, and it needs to be more qualitative and highly quantitative. It's very easy to calculate the number of cubic meters of drainage in each constituency or in each regional authority, right? And we need to know where these risk areas are. As I said, more emphasis needs to be done on modeling and trying to figure out where the actual water is running. I mean, it's we know where it's running. A lot of people know, but we need to actually have that on a model, on a map, so that we can begin to forecast where that water is going to go. We know where it is. I'm not saying that we don't, but I'm saying that education is going to be one of the main things going forward in terms of letting people know, not just the people who actually know, like the people about next to the rivers, but the people who are going to be using those areas. I mean, as I said, my daughter-in-law works in MIC, right, in Pinal. She grew up in Rochard Road, so she knows very well what is happening. So she left her car in the compound and got a pickup to drop her back here in Philippines, which means therefore she had the knowledge. But there are some people who don't, and they venture out or in the area using their vehicles. They get stranded in that area. They damage their vehicles. They damage themselves. They put other people at risk trying to save them. You see,
Yes.
so it's a lot of information education. When you drive from Gatwick, right, in London, when you take a plane and you go to Gatwick and you drive down to Heathrow, on that road you'll see big signs. This is a flooded area, right? It tells you what to expect, right? On the way there are flood signs, and there are signs. I'm seeing signs in a lot of those communities, right, as different. And those were signs that I was happy to say that we had started the empowerment of all the local government areas and the disaster management units at our time to put those signs. And I'm seeing the signs. I see signs in Barapore telling you, for example, when it reaches this level, you know it's going to flood. So there are signs and things are happening. So I'm happy to say that there are things that are happening. It has obviously mitigated the number of deaths that we have had. But I do feel that there's much more that needs to be done. And there are some quick wins. There's some medium term and long term wins that need to be done. I think that much more money has to go into mitigation and education of some of the areas, but also town and country, right, has to actually get a little more involved in when they approve properties for building and type of drainage that, and insurance companies themselves will have to know, for example, when you do the models, you know, where the waters are, which properties are more at risk. And therefore, if you buy a property or if you build on that property, what is the building code? It cannot be a universal building code for everyone, because there are certain areas that are more prone to flooding. You can't have the same building plan approved in an area of flooding compared to a different area like in Palmis or Bel Air or some of the high areas. So therefore, all of those things have to be taken into consideration.
I just want to jump in real quick here. So what I'm proposing, Dr. Ramroop, is that you get together with MP Tancoo and kind of pre-plan our team so that when we take government, that we are hitting the ground running. Basically, that's how I like to do it. I would like to have a couple more sessions where we are educating the people on our plan of action so they understand clearly where we're heading at. The third program that I was trying to introduce was exactly training the local and training at the local level so that we are that the resources are there, the training is there, the knowledge is there, and we can respond in an effective way before outside help can come, whether
Gary,
it's from the state.
I think that that is currently being done. The CERT training is currently being done. It's from a CAF-funded program. That CAF-funded program is now preparing communities at risk um, with regards to training, exactly what Dr. Rambo had said, with regards to training for mitigation. My concern is not mitigation right now. My concern is mitigation is very important, but that is not my concern. My primary concern is finding a way to solve the problem. And I believe that there is so what mitigation does is reduce the severity of the problem. But there are solves, there are easy solves. What is
Well,
required is a commitment.
that could fall into mitigation, Dave, because what we're doing is if we
Agreed.
deal with the infrastructure issue, if we dredge a river, if we install water treatment holding and treatment facility within those areas that has the high capacity of water, I think we can go that direction. Go ahead.
I'm in agreement, but what is currently being done is to show people from woodland and surrounding areas that are subject to flooding how to treat so that they become their first responders. That's excellent, but that is not treating the problem. That is treating the symptoms of the problem. I have yet to see the rest of that. So if I have to take what Dr. Ramupa said, the all of country approach, and I'm in agreement that what is required is an all of country approach. It's also an all of government approach. Is a multifaceted solution to this problem. But some of it is so openly and blatantly known that I think that even the CERT program right now it's not a fix. And as we get into the global warming phenomena, as climate change starts to impact us more and more, and it will, the problem of flooding is going to continue to get progressively worse because this government is not planning nothing that we have seen them do. Even the clearing of the rivers, they dredge the rivers and they put the material on top the bank. One rainfall, the water comes back, the water brings back the material back into the rivers,
With
back
no
into the
common
the
sense.
water courses. And so we have, well, there's an absence of common sense, but there's also, if you think about it, these are engineering solutions that can be applied. They are engineering solutions that can be applied. Um, that could can achieve the same result for the same cost. but maybe it is in somebody's interest to continuously employ somebody to do the same thing over and over and over and over, because there's a financial benefit to the contractor and to
by
the,
design.
the principals by design. If they solve the problem, then they don't have to come at last moments to bypass the procurement regulations and to award contracts to do these various pieces of infrastructural works on the basis of emergency, and therefore bypass the tendering procedures completely, and therefore we end up with overpriced temporary solutions, high-priced temporary solutions for things that could have been done at a lower price, and a solution be brought.
Yeah, I remember a good analogy is the sargassum. Just in front of my beach house in Mayaro, I remember not too long ago,
Oh, thanks very much for the invitation to Beach House in Maria. I appreciate
I
it very much.
saw, you're welcome. You're welcome. I saw backhoes, right? Backhoes came and they were cleaning the sargassum in the from the water, and they put it on the beach. It
Yes,
wasn't even beyond the high water line anyway. And as soon as the high tide came, it came back onto the shore. And the next day they came with the backhoe and they cleaned again. And I'm sure they had a bill to that.
of
The
course.
the sargassum story is a bigger story. And I remember I went to Martinique on a Rotary conference, and there was a company there that was actually getting corporate persons to print bags, put their logos on bags, and that these bags were being distributed at gas stations and uh, groceries. And the persons in the community would take these bags free, of course, and they would go and fill the sargassum from the shore, and they would take it with their little trucks and carts or whatever to a collection point, and then they would take that sargassum and they compressed it and they're using it for different things. And you wouldn't see a piece of sargassum. I mean, people were actually swimming out to get sargassum, and
Yes.
they were getting a little money for those bags. It was a reasonable fee, $10 or $15 or whatever for a bag. But what I'm just saying is that is flooding. That is what is happening with flooding. It is sargassum, like flooding, is a bigger problem. And there are solutions that are innovative, and it involves engaging the community. You hire the backhoes to remove the sargassum, and if you put it right there, like the cleaning of the riverbanks, it's going to come back in, and you're going to spend a lot of money. It's the same thing, really, and that doesn't. What that demonstrates is um, there's no planning and there is no strategy and there is no community engagement, very little. It's just as if something has to happen, you do what it is to get a solution, but you don't get involved in the deeper aspects of what you're doing, because sargassum is going to stay with us forever. Okay, just like flooding. When you go to places like in the Middle East, not in the Middle East, sorry, in Asia, I remember going to a little village that is actually living on the water. They live in the river. And we went to a little area there. We stayed overnight on the river, and they had restaurants on the river. They had everything. And once the monsoons come, there would be a siren, right? Whenever it reaches a certain level, and there'll be a barge that will pass and pick up all these people, and they have the doggy bags ready. They will go to the mainland and they will stay in a shelter, and then the flood will come, the water will rise, it will just wash out everything. When they come back, they mop up everything and they go about their business again. So that is what the science of water management has shown us in New Orleans. It has showed us that in Amsterdam, sorry, in Holland, and all of these areas where you have people living with water. You have to live with your water. I think once people realize that this is the science, this is the philosophy, living with your water means that you will always have flooding. A river, as we learned in geography in our high school days, would always have an upper, middle, and lower course. Flooding is a natural event that occurs that allows the river to develop. What we have done is we have put communities close to those rivers and expect the river to stop flooding. That will never happen. So therefore, infrastructure, I mean, we are flying people to Mars soon. We are flying big planes. When you go on a plane and you look at technology, when you drive from New Jersey to New York, there's an actual bridge that goes over the swamp area, over the span. It has nothing to do, you don't have people, complaining and lobbying that they're going to kill themselves if you put a bridge across and preventing people from building a road, to go from David down to Point. We don't have that because they built it way over the entire lagoon. There's technology, what I'm saying. There's engineering. There's things that could be done. That has to be done in Manzanilla, because you can't be fixing a road and every year you have to build a waterway, right, that actually goes above everything and let the water come underneath, right? That's what they're doing in New Orleans. That's what they had to do. They have to
That's
live
what I
with
was
the
trying to
water.
tell
You
Suraj
know,
Rambachan when he
yeah,
was reading the
that is
example.
what has to happen. That is what could have happened at the creek, Mosquito Creek,
Ah,
right? In other words, and no matter what you do, it's you're between a watershed, right, and an area. If you damage your watershed and you fill up your watershed, it's going to back up all the water back into such a trace. So the thing about it is that we when you it's frustrating, right? As I said, I'm a doctor, I'm an orthopedic surgeon, but unfortunately or fortunately, right, because of circumstances, I got involved in disaster management. And if I'm a stupid person coming out of Presentation College with a national scholarship with about 7 letters behind my name, if I'm stupid, I mean, tell me. If I could read a science and read research and go into books and learn about these things and have a master's in forensic medicine and a master's in healthcare management and a Royal College of Surgeons, I'm not a stupid person. So there are things that are there and things that could be done. The problem is that, political will, right, and funding allocations, right, lack of science in it, right, and also, just community involvement. I mean, people really have to go back to where it all starts, and that is at the house, and that is the home, and that's at the individual. A lot of people forget that, and I think that's where we have big problems.
I think too that this government prefers to spend money to treat the wound rather than treating the cause of the wound.
The
So what
prevention,
is happening? Not prevent. They don't care about prevention. It is like
which is much
healthcare.
feasible, to do the
It,
preventive.
Correct. It is like healthcare. If you treat with persons from an early age and teach them how to take care of themselves, the amount of money you have to spend in later age will reduce. It is simply a matter of two things. One is education, but you must treat with the problem. You must identify and treat with what the problems are. We know we cannot. We as a small island state cannot control global warming. Our input, our carbon footprint is a speck in the national, in the international world. We are spec, but we are impacted by what the rest of the world does. So we are in those circumstances, we are takers, not givers. But in terms of treating with these issues, I am tired of seeing stopgap measures being put in place and people's homes being underwater. I've seen it up to today. Up to today, I had to help a young lady. She must be in her late 70s, lift a washing machine to put it on blocks, only to see by the time I passed back an hour afterwards that the water was now higher than the 2 blocks that she has put the washing machine on. Um, those kinds of things should not be happening today in communities where we know what the solutions are, what the issues are, how to treat with them. Those things should not be happening at all. It is really frustrating, and my heart bleeds, and I'm sure yours as well, Doc, because you are from the same community.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that your heart bleeds as well to see for yourself firsthand how these people are impacted. And these are average citizens, And these are the same people now that the government is coming and saying pay property tax based on an annual rental value. Doc, in such a trace, right on the riverbank, where a man got a property tax assessment and has to pay $400 and something in property tax. It sounds like a small figure, but I challenge the government to prove that his home can be rented for $900. I think it's $900 or $1,200 a month. I challenge the government because nobody wants to go and rent there. Nobody wants to go and rent there because they know that flooding will affect them. These are the same people now being challenged and insisting that the government insists that they pay property tax when they should be getting a rebate because the government is not doing what is required to be done. And you will find that I'm stressing on the government not doing their part. I think that the other persons doing their part. I know that the search training and so on is going on. But what is required is a bigger problem, the bigger fix, the temporary and the short, medium, and long-term fixes. Those are the things that are not being channeled. And if after a decade it's not been done yet, I don't see it being done before the next election. Um, what is clear to me is that there's a lack of political will, and the only way that these solutions could take place is if somebody else does it that has the political will. This is not a campaign slogan or campaign strategy. These are facts. If the people from Oropouche East, Oropouche West, Siparia, even from the East-West corridor, if they really want solutions to problems that the country is facing, and it's not just flooding, flooding is one of those, unemployment is another, crime is another, health challenges, access to healthcare, those are all others, education, those are issues. If they really want changes to happen, they must know by now that this government is not inclined or willing to do it. And they have to make the necessary changes. We cannot continue doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Totally agree with you, Dave. Here, but I want to continue to use this platform to inform and educate the people. I want them to clearly understand our plan of action and how we plan to handle the future flooding by the way we will deal with the infrastructure. As you said, there are certain things has to be done with dredging the river. I am also suggesting that we install the pumps, the large industrial pumps that you can put there. Also, the water treatment, where we contain that water for water treatment. So it becomes a water treatment area where you take the mass amount of water and you contain it in that area because it's like the Oropouche River, the Guaracara River, mass amount of water. That area could have a structure built for water treatment within that area. And definitely the dredging, the maintenance. I mean, we are dealing with global warming, so you're going to get a month rain in 2 days, or maybe in one day. So definitely we have to move in that direction, and the infrastructure, we definitely have to deal with it.
Agreed.
Dr. Ramroop,
100%
you want to
agreed.
jump in here?
Sorry.
I said if you want to jump in here to say anything else.
Well, I said, I mean, I think um, uh, there are a lot of work that has to be done in the areas, not the areas that were even flooded yesterday and today. It's flooding is taking place across the entire country. It's getting so bad now. If you go to Port of Spain and it rains heavily, you might have to stay into Port of Spain. And then when you're coming down the road, there's so much traffic, to get back into South. So and vice versa. So it's it's a problem that has. I mean, what amazes me is I remember even in 2011 to 2017 when I was involved in these type of matters. There were so many programs that were being developed at the time or were actually in place in terms of Port of Spain flooding. I remember a company came in, that was hired by our government at the time, to look at drainage and to look at flood mitigation. And we even developed a flood mitigation policy and worked with the Water Resource Agency. And that policy was submitted to the National Security Ministry for sending to the Ministry of National Planning and Development at the time. So what amazes me, this is 2017, now it's 2024, and all of these policies and plans were submitted, they were lodged, and you're not even seeing the effects of what implementation would have done. And then you hear the MP. I mean, as I said, I'm not involved in it now. I'm out of the politics. I'm out of the, I'm just doing what I have to do now. But basically, when you come back and you hear on the news, I mean, you're living in a small community. You have to be part of it, and politics is part of what you do anyhow. But when you try to stay out of the politics and you look at what is happening and you hear the MP talking about, you look on the news and you see what's happening in the areas, you see people pleading for help, and you see little children, being marooned, and they don't have water or they don't have a bed to sleep in tonight. And you tend, I mean, I'm a Rotarian now for 36 years. I mean, I'm in community service at the Rotary level. And I mean, we don't even have this. We have other things that we're dealing right now: domestic abuse, bullying in schools, crime-affected families. It's not just that I'm dealing with. I'm a Rotarian, and we're dealing with a lot of other stuff, not just flooding. So it's a sad thing when you look at the metrics that we were supposed to submit to the United Nations, right, and SIDIMA as part of our responsibilities in implementing disaster risk reduction. One of our major risks in this country is flooding, right? I mean, earthquake is a big risk, but it's not a, it's a low frequency risk. But flooding is a high frequency risk, meaning that it is going to happen over and over again. And when we look at what we have to report back to the United Nations and to the regional, CARICOM level about what we are doing for disaster risk reduction, we are supposed to have seen some sort of improvement, right, in those metrics. And frankly speaking, um, every time you look at what's happening, you don't see that. But then sometimes now you look at what happened in Spain, and then you say, and even Canada. I mean, I'm in Canada quite a lot these days with my daughters. And when you look at flooding in Canada, I mean, I saw flooding in Mississauga recently, all on the streets, and
Yes.
the Don Valley area where where the river runs, and there's flooding there as well. I mean, I saw flooding in the subways of New York, right? So there was flooding in Germany recently, right? Not even in the ones in West Africa affecting crops. We're talking about Germany. These are developed countries with systems and programs that are highly developed in terms of planning. And look at what is happening. So there is an element of, there's an element that is something that we may not be able to prevent, but at least we would have seen some improvement, in terms of what is happening. But to me, as the MP said, and I mean, I myself, every time I see heavy rains, I get worried because I mean, right now, again, my in-law, my daughter-in-law works in MIC in Pinal, right, and her family is from that area. So now I have an extended family, and I worry about them every time there is a heavy rainfall, and that is not something that in a small country with a population of, I mean, 1.3 million. I mean, you're not even talking about millions of people. You're talking about a country that could be easily mapped. Every single house, in the
Agree.
housing census could be mapped. Their EDs, not electoral districts, right? These are enumeration districts that are actually recorded in the Ministry of Planning and Development, and that records every single dwelling house, every single commercial entity, every single person that lives on every single street, right? We call it enumeration districts. That's how we measure where they are, right? And I remember coming to Pinal Debe Regional Corporation and doing a training and to ask them to use the EDs from the Ministry from the House and Census, and that tells you every single street. And use the same people who are bringing the hampers and pampers. If the government can't do it, you can actually engage these same people like Rotary clubs and Kiwanis and Red Cross to go to these houses and map them like we do when we have elections. We know every single house. We know who is voting for who. We know where they're living. We know who is crippled. We know who is on a wheelchair. That is the kind of mapping that we have to have, and that has to be located at the MP's office as well as the regional corporation. I am sure that it
Easy
exists
fix.
a
Easy
large extent.
fix.
Yes.
Yeah, it's an
And
easy
it's just
fix.
1.3 million people. And not all the areas are affected by flooding. I mean, when you look at all the high areas, you're looking at landslides and whatnot. Fine. That's a different type of risk. If you look at the East Coast, we're looking at surge. We're looking at, water coming in from, high waters,
Sort of intrusion, yeah.
rise, whatever. But there's flooding which has socio-natural causes, meaning that there's elements of social issues, right, as well as natural issues. And that's why the Latin Americans always use the word socio-natural when it comes to flooding. It's not just climate change. There are other issues, such as terrible burning of rubbish and at the high areas where people are gardening improperly, where you don't have proper drainage cleaning coming up. I mean, we talk about levees and water retention ponds and whatever. So yes, there's a social component. People, in fact, who live in some of these homes, they don't even clean their drains, some of them, you know what I mean? And they don't have proper runoff of their water from their homes, drainage issues. So it's a multifaceted problem. And I think that we are small and it is solvable, as the MP is requesting it. There are solutions that are going to prevent the type and amount of flooding. It's not going to totally remove it, but we'll be able to control it and we'll be able to live with it. You know what I mean? And then it will be easier for the fire services or the MPs or even the charitable or humanitarian groups to say, well, look, instead of going to give a community of 100 people help, you only have to give about 2 or 3, because
Correct.
as time goes on, you will develop that resiliency. and therefore you'll have less and less need, to assist the communities if you reduce the impact of flooding, which I talked about the river. You will always have it, but the point is you will be able to manage it. And it's 1.3 million people. We could do that, and that is my problem.
I
We
think too
definitely
that
can manage it,
I
you know.
think
90 and it will still be so. Oh my God, I don't understand what is going on.
I think so. I think too that we are all young enough to remember when we used to have short-term, medium-term, and long-term planning. So we had long-term solutions for long-term problems.
Yeah.
Flooding, drainage, these are long-term problems that we have had, that we have enough time to study and to assess. And therefore, what we need is a long-term plan with short-term and medium-term stopgap measures while we get to the long-term plan.
Mhm.
What we see is an absence of long-term plans implementation. There's a lot of talk, there's a lot of documentation, there's a lot of plans. What is lacking is the implementation of those plans in the long term, because a government generally is looking for the 5-year cycle. That's a short term. They're looking for the 5-year cycle so that they could get returns and get back into office. That's why this current government will not engage in any plans that the former government had put in place. So we had plans for development of tourism, for education, etc., where we were building campuses. What we end up having is a government that came in and stopped all the long-term plans and started doing its own thing. And while that is happening, we have we have no expansion of the tourist sector, we have no expansion of the sports development, we have no expansion of the educational development or the health sector, etc., because we are looking at a 5-year time frame. What is clearly required is a long-term approach to long-term problems. And that requires serious consensus, maybe even among parliamentarians, but serious consensus in terms of developing an agreement that this is the way we are going to go. We are going to treat with flooding as a national issue, as a national crisis, and therefore we're going to treat with crime as a national crisis, and therefore these things require long-term, short-term, and medium-term solutions. Instead, we end up focusing on the cleaning of the river courses. And Doc, you are, like I said, you are in my community as well, and you know that you would have driven by and you would have seen on the sides of the roads excavators working, cleaning out these water courses. But I can tell you from my own experience, some of that work was done during the dry season. Now, when you walk upriver, you realize that they only did this thing a few hundred meters from the road,
Good, yeah.
where you could see. So what happens is right afterwards, you end up with water coming down, and the same madness happens again. The water lilies grow back because they have not even treated with water lilies properly. Those water lilies are in Tulsa Trace, for example, that catchment area that is just immediately before the pump is continuously clogged with water lilies. Those water lilies affect the efficiency of the pump as well. The floodgates, 14-gate floodgates, that will affect your communities as well, Doc. Those,
Yeah.
those, those floodgates, they are still floodgates that are not working.
Hmm.
There are still floodgates that are not working, that are seized and unable to be opened. So we don't have quick water runoff, and we have water intrusion coming in on occasion, saltwater intrusion. So we've seen substantial damage. In today, we have the Newcut Channel breaking its bank in an area that Heritage has been spending some time in, because inadequate work was done to repair the banks during the season, during the dry season, and even when they went to do it during the time frame that they had, they didn't do a good job. We have an issue of qualitative, quantitative project management. So you have terrestrial, where we have a government giving a contractor, a gentleman, he spends millions of dollars and 2 or 3 years to build a development, only to have to crash it because nobody was paying attention to the quality of workmanship being done. It's the same thing happening. So minister has to take responsibility because he's at the top. He's at the top. The buck's supposed to stop with him. But the work being done by the contractors at the ground level is something that somebody should be monitoring before payment is issued. The absence of monitoring means that we are spinning top in mud. And it is really frustrating because we are paying taxes. I pay my taxes on time. I'm sure, Doc, you pay multiple levels of taxation as well. We all pay our taxes and expect that the government will do its duty. to ensure that the resources of the country are spent for the benefit of the constituencies, for the benefit of the people of this country, to treat with the problems that they face. And we are not seeing that, which is why we are seeing the crime that as bad as it is. You just mentioned um, the East Coast story, where we have repeatedly repaired the same road over and over and over because some contractor needs to pay for their brand new vehicle, for their brand new house in Miami or something. It is simply for me a failure on the part of government to ensure that we have project management, proper project management from day one, to ensure that the proper resources are being applied to places that need them so that we don't have the situation where we currently have, where instead of treating with 2 and 3 persons as just described, we have to treat with the after effects of lack of foresight.
Yeah, I do agree that the causeways are something that, I mean, they need to start it, and I'm sure you could get international funding. I went to Jamaica recently, and I drove to the north coast, and if you look at those lovely highways that have been built by the Chinese and the Dutch people there through the mountains, and they're beautiful highways. It's amazing that some of the things that can be done. I would like
Doc,
to
you've been to
see.
Guyana, right? You've been to Guyana.
Yes, yes, yes.
You've
Recently,
been to Georgetown. And
yes,
you stand in Georgetown and you watch up and you see a levee.
yes,
And immediately behind that level is the seawall because
yeah,
Georgetown is below sea level.
yeah.
So, so
As I say,
I take your point. There's a
you
way
have to
to
live with
treat
the
with the,
water.
you have to live with the
Yeah,
water, but there's a way
let
to
the water
prevent
come
it from
in,
adversely affecting the people as
manage
it
it.
does
Yeah.
now.
So
There's a way to manage it.
I'm hoping that we could probably. I'm suggesting that some scholarships could be given, because one of the problems with the long-term planning, I think that although Ministry of Planning may have the resources to do it, it's, as you say, it's not something that is actually high up on the table when it comes to communities such as these. I think we could get some scholarships to give to some of the young UWI and UTT students because part of long-term planning is data and information coming out of reliable data.
Excellent. Excellent.
And if
Excellent.
we could, if
Excellent
we
idea.
could give these scholarships to these young people to come down and start looking at the water movement, start studying the use of the retention ponds and the topography and the geography, and they can do that, trust me. And we can get some of these people to do it, and you all can generate some scholarships to give these young people. It will help a lot in actually having evidence-based discussions at the parliamentary level as well as at the level of the Ministry of Planning to say, well, look, hey, we have had 10 UE students or UTT students come down and they're looking at how water is moving, and this is what they did, and this is at the studies. And these children or these young people would run studies that are comparable, and you could get a team of persons, to actually study it and give them, scholarships to and prizes, whatever.
That's a
Or
phenomenal,
make
phenomenal
a
idea.
model, make a model like how it is, make a model and
Yeah,
take it
I
into the
think that
school.
that needs to be done, and I think
It's
you
a
all should
phenomenal
lobby
idea.
again.
But I tell you the constraint. The constraint is that we award scholarships based on something else. We
Yeah,
don't award scholarships based on
yeah.
the needs that we have in this country.
So I think
We
it
don't
could be
award
a
scholarships based on the development plans because we lack the development plans. So
yeah,
if you don't know where you want to go,
yeah,
if you don't know where you want to go, how are we going to get there?
yeah. It might be
And you're
something.
right. If we
It might be
identify that
something.
global warming is a crisis and
Yeah,
we need to do something about flooding and drainage,
yeah,
some of the scholarships that we are awarding should be specific,
yeah.
should be very specific to the needs that we have today, tomorrow, and in the future.
But
And
I
therefore, we
think that it
train the
could be.
staff to do that.
Yeah, it could be done right now from community-based engagements, because if the government can't do it, I think it could probably start from some of our communities, having some large fundraisers and probably looking at what it is to put out these as studies that could be done by young people and let them come and do it. And the other thing is to lobby for. I remember in 2011 when I was in ODPM, an interministerial committee was set up for flooding. I'm serious, it was. And I think that had pointed to the fact that it wasn't just a national security ministry, it was all the other relevant ministries coming together to deal with it, you see. And I think an
That is vision.
interministerial committee should be set up as soon as possible to deal with it. So at least we should lobby for that, just to get things done. And
That is vision.
another
That is
ministerial
very
committee
good
alone,
vision.
it
Yes.
should have members of the opposition and other areas, people involved in it as well. And I think those are two things that should be done very quickly, so that the the data for any long-term planning in terms of what's going to happen in the areas of flooding right now that we're seeing, both in the north and south. But we, since it's our area, I think we should get these young people to come and do some studies now, and award the scholarships based on those studies, and let them come and do it. And I think that's something that could be done pretty quickly, and it will actually mean a lot in next year or two, definitely in the next year, in terms of where we need to go with this flooding. Something substantive, something that is tangible, and something that means that hey, look, we have some definite information about what's happening in our area. It's not just hearsay and hearing the guy down by the river or the politician rambling and saying, oh my God, we want this. This is actual data coming out of the areas that are flooded in the last 5 years. And this is done by UB students. We gave them a scholarship to go and study for a whole year, right? Based on these studies, we had a team evaluate the projects, and they were beautiful, and we're sending it to the Ministry of Planning. I mean, this is what I'm talking about.
Well,
But
there's more than that.
also a
We
senior
also have government to
engineer.
government. We have government to government agreements between ourselves, the government of China, and the government of Sweden. We can have government to government arrangements where experts who have treated with flooding, and this is just one example, because you could also do it for crime, you could do it for education, you could do it for health, you could do it for every other aspect, even business development. You have international persons who have international experience, etc., coming to Trinidad and Tobago to implement some of these very same solutions that they've tried and gotten done in their various in their various countries. So I think that there's potential. The mechanisms exist. The solutions exist. What is, like I said, I started, is the political will is lacking. If the political will is lacking, but the citizen will is present, we have one direction we must go in.
The will to keep everything international to Port of Spain, not for South. Keep it everything in Port of Spain. You understand? That is the will they have.
That benefits a community, my friend. That benefits a community.
Yeah, but I'm
It
just saying they want to
benefits a
keep it
part of the community.
one direction. They have it in, and the UE campus in DB, they don't want it to be operative.
They shut it down. Billions and millions. I mean, Doc, you know the school, right? Almost opposite my constituency. There's a school that was finished. It was completed. Infrastructure was put in place. The walls are up. The sheeting was up. All that was missing was fixtures, doors, toilets. Even the electrical lighting was already in place. That school has been abandoned for 10 years. It was 90-something% finished. That school has been abandoned for 10 years. Now there are trees growing in classrooms. I mean, these are tax-paying dollars. And while these are taxpayers' dollars, and while that has happened, you have citizens, you have children who are in crowded, cramped conditions because there's a lack of vision, there's a lack of planning, and there's a poor implementation of plans for long term. We are planning right now, and we are seeing it. We are planning right now. Doc, you just said it. We have a two-lane bridge in such a trace, in that DB trace area. We have a bridge that's so narrow that it's a two-lane bridge according to the documents. It's a two-lane bridge, but you have to be so extra cautious because you are literally passing inches next to each. It's a driving test. A truck has to stop, and that creates traffic jam. That's a cost to citizens, etc., etc. So it's a multiplicity of issues that needs to be addressed. Even that bridge is also low. Even that bridge is also low. The one next to the bridge next to the Sudama Tirth, that bridge is so low that when the water is high, it touches the bottom of the bridge, causing more damage to the bridge itself. There was a plan when I came in. One of the first things I met with, first set of people I met with, were engineers from the Ministry of Works who said that they were going to elevate that bridge and all the other bridges in Woodland because it was part of a national plan to raise the roadway so it would be higher. In some other parts of the world, we lower the roadway and use the roadway for water runoff. Some community development, some gated communities, etc., some housing developments currently use that process where you put the water courses over excesses of water for the 20-year flow flow into for the 20-year storm that you plan for a 20-year storm. For the 20-year storm, expected to flow into the roadways to get faster runoff. We don't do any of that now. Now we're just paving the roads and think that that's great. And then 2 years afterwards, you have to come and pave the road again because it benefits some people. It is really frustrating as an economist, and I'm an economist first and foremost. I'm a business person. Doc, you're a businessman too. You know that it is frustrating to see bad money spent, especially when you see bad money being spent after bad money after bad money after bad money, and nothing is improving. It is frustrating and irritating to the extremes for me to see that.
And this is where we're not getting value for money there, you know?
We are not getting value for money. That's a fact. As a matter of fact, we are throwing money into a vicious hole that's simply absorbing the money without producing results. What we needed to have is a smart system, and that I can break down the acronyms for you. But we needed to have key performance indicators for all these projects that the government is doing, so that we could see for ourselves that the government is making progress in treating with some of the solutions and some of the problems that we have. If we don't do that, what we end up is every 5 years, the government can come and make the same promise because they've solved nothing.
But this is why we need to educate our population, gentlemen. The government has never been concerned about the holistic development of Trinidad and Tobago. They have only been concerned about the holistic development of their friends and financiers and family. And all the other governments that came in, the NAR and the Bastille Pandey, UNC, and the PP government that came in 2010 to 2015, they were more concerned about the holistic development of the country and the holistic development of our biggest natural resource, which is our people. And we have to educate our population and get them to understand that this is where we have to go. This is the change, the paradigm shift that we need to make in order to get Trinidad and Tobago moving forward in our development, because the PNM was never concerned from 1956 all the way to present. They were never concerned about holistic development of the country. Why is Moruga still the same Moruga that we know from 1956? Why is Toko still the same Toko we know from 1956? Why is Ikakas still the same Ikakas that we know from 1956, while Westmoreland and Glencoe and Bayshore have developed and is looking like Miami? Why is that happening? Why is Tobago being developed? We're spending close to, I remember Dr. Rowley boasting just before the THA elections, the last THA elections, that they spent $7.5 billion in Tobago. That is what was spent in that year leading up to that elections in Tobago. Did they spend $7.5 billion in Point Fortin and Labrie, two constituents in Tobago? So
Nope.
we have to educate the population on the geographic discrimination, as you like to put it, MP Tancoo, and get them to understand that the only three governments that replaced the PNM, those were the three governments that tried to get Trinidad holistic development of Trinidad and Tobago, and they need to see that the PNM is not concerned about that at all. I seem to have gotten cut off there.
No,
Yes,
no, we're hearing you. I was waiting for somebody else to jump in. I think we are all in agreement that there's need for some serious work to be done to treat with flooding frontally. It's an all of country approach as required. It is a series of plans that are known already. The solutions are all known. But what is happening, what we are seeing is a piecemeal approach, and that cannot work. Piecemeal approaches cannot work for long-term solutions. Sorry, where long-term solutions are required. Piecemeal solutions cannot work. And as a matter of fact, all it comes across is, this is Mama Guy. So they assign millions of dollars to treat with, to give to citizens. In fact, let me raise that as a reference. They identified millions of dollars to give to citizens as flood relief. What we want is not flood relief, we want relief from floods. Isn't that so?
Exactly.
We want
Exactly.
relief from floods.
Exactly.
We don't want flood relief. We don't want unemployment benefits. We want benefit from employment. We don't want, that is a problem. There's a lack of prioritization. The government is comfortable in having created a sense of dependency.
Throwing some
In,
crumbs out
in,
there.
Oh,
yes,
that's what I was.
so they mash up the unions. They sacrifice small businesses for big businesses. They created a sense of dependency. So anything you want now, you have to beg or protest. If you don't beg for resources to be spent in your communities, you're not going to get it. If you don't threaten and protest, you're not going to get it. But that is not how a developed country operates. That's not how you hold persons in office to account. I think too many times politicians, especially when they're in government, seem to forget that we are all servants of the people. People put us there to represent their interests. I know that the opposition has been doing a champion job of holding this government to account by representing our citizens' interests. But when you have a minister of national security and all the other ministers who are along the same line saying, my job is not to solve your problem, my job is to make sure that they have resources, and then you could prove that the TTPS doesn't have the resources required. The Coast Guard has no boats, no vessels. So I'm carrying it to a wider perspective to show you what the problem is. The problem is really and truly, it's not that the government does not know what to do. The
Political.
tests, the studies, the evaluations, the programs, the plots, they are all in place. It is an implementation paralysis that this government has. And I think it is, in my view, that it's deliberate. I said it before, and I want to repeat it. It is so that they can give their friends, family, and financiers last minute contracts to
Exactly.
set to quickly fix the problem and bypass the procurement regulator. Procurement regulators told this country just recently that upwards of $5 billion has been given out to contracts without proper procedures. $5 billion. Think about if we could get $5 billion in South Trinidad, or which east of half the flooding issues could have been addressed.
Where the money
Doc,
going?
I
Where the
agree with
money?
I agree with Dr. Ramroop. As global warming continues, we will be faced with even greater and greater and greater challenges. So our solutions today must plan for those things ahead. If you have 10 years have passed and not a single retention pond built, not a single levee implemented in the bridges, sorry, in the river courses in this country, in Oropouche in particular, no river courses has been cleared for the entire course of the river. No banks built up, none. No retention pond built, no pumps installed. I mean, there's one pump that they put into Tulsa Trace, and today it wasn't working. We are in a crisis now, not just in terms of flooding, but that's one of those issues. We're in a crisis now because the government does not want to treat with the problems. It's cosmetic. It's so the minister will come and cut a ribbon and say everything is going to be fine. And every 2 years, he's going to pronounce that, listen, there's going to be a solution. We're working on the solution. This is where we are spending millions and millions and millions of dollars, but we are not getting value for money because none of these problems have had an ounce of solution. As a matter of fact, you all can agree. Kumar, you live in South. You can agree that right now, the problems that we faced 10 years ago have become worse, although we have spent more than half of $1 trillion. Every single problem has become worse, and that cannot be by accident.
Dave, one of the things I want to really do is when you're out there and viewing these areas, I would like to go live with you. Where if you could have somebody, with a device, that you can narrate a little bit and show people what's taking place out there whenever
I
you
don't mind
go.
doing that. I think that what has happened now is that there's a lot of information on social media. A lot. And plus, um, some of the times, as today, we went in to assess places in need, and some people may not be inclined to show themselves in need. When we go back out at some point with cleaning supplies uh, and so on, we may not want to show some of those things as well. But I take your point, and I think at the next occasion that I have, I will get the opportunity to to get one or two persons who are adversely affected by flooding to come and speak to you from their own experience, their specific experience, so that they will tell you how bad it is, how long it's been bad. They will speak frankly. Some of them will blame the MP, some will blame the council, some will blame the government. Um, but I think we will want them to be very clear in speaking their own conditions so that people can really relate. Because sometimes when you hear it from the politician, you think that it's pure politics, it's games we're playing because it's political um, commentary. But when you hear it from the people who are directly affected, persons who have not had water for 2 months, people who have had flooding in their homes, 5 and 6 feet of water in their homes, people who have seen uh, caiman in their homes, uh, those kinds of activity, people who found rats, cockroaches, snakes, etc. Those kind of experiences, that I can ask people to engage in, and maybe because of the timing involved, we could probably do some short videos and send to you so you could also broadcast them.
Yeah,
I'm
we
not too sure
definitely
if it,
we
right. Okay.
definitely need to really kind of bring these things to life so people can see what's happening within the community outside there. Whenever I know it gets kind of hectic with you with so many things you're dealing with,
It
especially
does. It
you
does.
know.
It does.
But you
And
know,
the
if you
purpose,
could get
some of the purposes too that we visit these homes are really to find the solutions to treat to the immediate crisis that has happened. So sometimes it's a bit difficult to hold up to a live feed.
yeah, yeah, I know. That's what
When
I'm
we
saying.
just
If you
try
get
to,
somebody to help you, that would be better because you would be fully engaged. I know you're bombarded with so many things dealing with. Lack of resources,
Gary, if
is
you
one
saw
of the
today,
big issues. Yeah.
today it was a literal rush from crisis one to crisis two to crisis three to crisis four, and I only stopped because I knew I had to engage this discussion. But I know that some of my colleagues, some of my counselors, some of my activists are still on the ground today as we speak, right now as we speak, and will be continuing to do so. As I'm saying that, I want to hail out the very hardworking staff of my office, the very hardworking staff of the councillors as well, and the councillors themselves, some of my MP colleagues who have gone out. The leader of the opposition today was out treating with the floodwater victims herself directly, one on one, seeing, touring the areas. Things that the government, the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Works and Transport should have been first hand doing as well, but they haven't done.
We
We
don't see
have
that.
seen some, I mean, Dr. Ramroop could tell you as well, the Rotary Club and some of the other SEWA, TT, even KFC and Subway. Some of these entities have been providing us with some support during these crises. I really do wish that we could have channeled some of that support so that we wouldn't have the crises that we have. But there are persons who have stepped forward. They are very good citizens of this country who have stepped forward and have been putting their money where their mouth is and have been putting themselves at risk and at challenges. And I want to commend them. May God bless Trinidad and Tobago. We still have substantial patriots among us who are willing to spend time, effort, and energy and money out of their pockets to ensure that their fellow man is taken care of. I am motivated by some of those very same people. I want to highlight Gautam Maharaj again because I really do think he's doing a phenomenal job. I want to
Yeah,
highlight
I'd love to
Devnath
have him
Nehru,
here.
same thing.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I would speak to Gautam, and we will because I
Well,
mean
come together. You can come together. Yeah.
up to very late. No, I would speak to Gautam to get him to come on board because he could tell you firsthand experience some of the
Yeah.
challenges he's had in raising resources and some of the actual experiences he's had in lifting physically people out of water to put them under a truck. When you
Yeah.
see children worried about their dogs, etc., it's a humbling experience, and that's what I'm hearing. All the heroes we have, unsung heroes. They don't get national awards, they don't get national recognition, but they have been doing human service. We have patriots amongst them, and once we meet these patriots, we must hail them out because this is not about money. You could never pay somebody who's going out in that flood water, risking their lives on a regular basis. You can't pay that person sufficiently.
So I definitely want to give them some public view here that they are seeing internationally what they're doing. So
Well, I think for many of these people, it's not about the public supporting, but for many of them, I think it is important that other people see that there are
Yes,
people who are doing this, so that can motivate them too, because
yes.
we are in a crisis now where patriotism is a challenge in this country. If we have more and more people who don't just wear the flag, don't wear the coat of arms just like this, don't just wear it because they're wearing it, they wear it because they believe here every creed and race finds an equal place. Here, if we work together, together we can aspire, together we can achieve. These are real things. And in these crises, these people, sometimes it's the very same people that emerge and do wonderful things to bring people together. Crises, nothing brings people together like crises. When we had COVID-19, our agricultural sector was motivated to produce. And right
Yeah,
after
we saw that.
COVID-19, the government abandoned them again. Folks,
Yeah, but what I'm saying, we could,
my phone is about to go to the funeral home. Um,
right.
So I may get cut off in a few minutes. I want to thank
Thank
you
you so
all.
much.
I know this may not be this may not be the end of, but I want to thank you all for the opportunity to present some information and to speak to some of the problems. It has always been a pleasure to hear Dr. Ramroop speak because he speaks from first-hand experience, having worked on some of the solutions that he knows that if we implemented today, we would not have some of the problems that we're having today. So I will continue to listen and participate for as long as my phone facilitates.
So thank you very much, MP Tancoo. And we want to build on this conversation. We want to build on the ground with the relation there with Dr. Ramroop and whatever way he can assist and guide and help our people there. So see what you can do to kind of engage people with him on going forward. And we will talk more on this. So thank you very much for taking the time, Dr. Ramroop. You have any last words you want to add to this?
No, I think that the MP did a good job. As I said, I'm glad that I was invited to come, not not as a political, in a political way, but as being the head of ODPM, before. So I have a lot of experience, as the MP said. So I'm hoping that I could see some change. I mean, I don't think it will happen within the short term, because rain is going to come again, unfortunately, and we are going to get flooding again. So
Yes.
we will have the same discussion again. So I'm hoping that some things happen drastically in this country with respect to flooding, not just in the communities that we just talked about, but all over this country, because the solutions are there. It's just that it's really frustrating to see that it's not being at least partially implemented. But and I mean, I'm hoping that within the next year, that in the dry season, that maybe we could see some change, because things can happen. It just I don't know what is our problem. We are such a brilliant country with good people, and we have the resources to a large extent. It's just that somehow, I don't know,
We
it's
won't connect
just
the dots and we won't communicate and won't
yeah,
collaborate.
it's just frustrating that it doesn't seem to be coming together. It's you travel all over the world and you don't fill out an immigration form, but as soon as you land in Trinidad, you have to get up in the middle of the night and in the plane and fill out a form with dim light and a pen that doesn't even work, and that is so frustrating. Yet you go to Barbados and Jamaica and St. Lucia, even United States, there's no form. I mean, in
Well,
Canada,
don't
there's no
talk about
form.
immigration. I get the worst treatment coming in there. It's like I get treated like I shouldn't come there.
Yeah,
That's
so
how
when
I
you
get
when you
treated.
when you think about people who think our country is like Miami, and then you come in your own country and you see these things, you get a bit frustrated. And I think flooding is just one of our problems. Crime is a big problem as well. So I don't know, it is sometimes irritating, but you know the good thing about it is that there are things that are happening in other countries all over the world. I mean, I've been to Canada recently. I see people squatting and people living in parks. A lot of immigrants coming in. Some people begging for food, even downtown. So things are post COVID. Things are really really bad. Mental health, mental illness is very high. Suicide rates have gone up. So I think that in addition to dealing with the flooding per se, these things just don't help the mental health of some of these people. And I think that we need to do more as community workers. Um, as I mean, government has a definite role to play, but I do feel that more can be done for some of our communities, to help. Simple things at home could reduce the amount of flooding in the areas, and people who are building their homes and putting gravel, and people are cutting their branches, and the trees are actually falling in these water courses, and they're blocking up the water courses higher up.
Exactly.
All of these things, they can also help as well. So
So we could
I,
have our local government councils keep an eye out for those things and kind of
I think
address it.
that I think that it's some of it it could be dealt with, strategically, but I think that it must be treated like almost like a business, so that you can begin to hold some of your councillors accountable, using, as the MP said, some performance indicators that, every so often they say, well, how many cubic feet of drainage were cleared this month, and what's happening with this street that had floods last week, and so there's a check, to see what's happening. So I guess it is what it is. Thanks very much for inviting me. I was happy to come on and share a few of my ideas and some of my experience. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramroop, and also
I think we have lost some connectivity there.
Yeah, yeah. All right.
Mhm.
So I'll
okay,
see you.
gentlemen. Good night. Thank you very much
Take,
for joining us, and
take
we'll
care.
talk again soon.
All
Okay,
right.
bye.
Happy belated birthday, Doc.
Thanks.
I don't have the balloon behind you. All the best.
All right, you take care.
Thanks.
So I want to thank our listener audience for joining us, and we will continue this conversation. Thank you, everyone. Good night.